How did a country that didn't even exist 250 years ago end up running the global economy? Was it luck? Was it just being big? Actually, neither of those hold up once you look closely. What really happened was a chain of specific decisions and disasters, and one very quiet meeting in a New Hampshire hotel that most people have never even heard of. We're going through it in order, piece by piece, so by the end, you'll understand the actual mechanics behind it, not just the version everyone repeats. It starts with the map. Why did America get to grow uninterrupted while Europe kept tearing itself apart? Because it sits behind two oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific, and never had to fight enemy troops on its own soil the way Europe did for centuries. That safety meant the country could pour almost all its energy into growth instead of defense. Underneath that land sat oil, coal, iron ore, and some of the most fertile farmland on Earth. Most rising powers in history have had to fight hard for even one of those advantages. America started with all of them at once, untouched. So how did all that raw potential actually turn into power? Between 1870 and 1900, John D. Rockefeller took a single oil refining company and turned it into a near-total monopoly. By 1872, he'd already absorbed 22 of the 26 oil refineries in Cleveland alone. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of oil production in the entire world. At the same time, Andrew Carnegie was using the Bessemer process to mass-produce steel so cheaply that American steel output hit 60 million tons a year by 1900. More than Britain and Germany combined. Railroads followed the same pattern, growing to over 200,000 miles of track by 1893, stitching the whole country into one single connected market for the first time. This is usually one paragraph in a textbook, but it's really the engine room that made everything after it possible. Here's the part that gets skipped the most. What actually turned America into a superpower wasn't victory in the world wars. It was geography again. Every major industrial power in Europe had its factories, railways, and cities bombed or fought over twice within 30 years. America's factories never took a single hit. So while the rest of the world was digging out of rubble, American industry kept running at full capacity, selling equipment, food, and loans to everyone else. By 1945, the U.S. held more gold reserves and more industrial output than every other country on Earth combined. That gap is the real foundation the rest of the century was built on. But how do you turn an economic gap into permanent global power? You put it into law. In July 1944, while the war was still going on, 730 delegates from 44 Allied nations met at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and agreed that the U.S. dollar, pegged at $35 an ounce of gold, would become the currency every other nation's money was measured against. That same meeting created the IMF and what's now the World Bank. From that point on, if any country wanted to trade internationally, it needed dollars to do it. That single agreement from over 80 years ago is still the quiet reason the dollar carries so much weight today. Money and factories still need people to run them. So what happened at home? In 1944, the GI Bill sent over 2 million returning veterans to college, producing 450,000 new engineers along with tens of thousands of doctors, scientists, and teachers in less than a decade. Combined with cheap federal home loans that built entire new suburbs like Levittown, it created the largest, most educated middle class the world had ever seen. The exact workforce and consumer base that powered American industry for the next 50 years. And that's what let the next shift happen. With educated engineers, cheap capital, and a government still funding research from the war, small groups of scientists in California started building the transistor industry that would eventually become Silicon Valley, turning American risk-taking into the thing that kept the country ahead. Even after the rest of the world had rebuilt and caught up industrially. None of this was inevitable. It was geography buying time. Industrialists building infrastructure most people never asked for. 2 wars clearing out the competition. 1 meeting in New Hampshire turning that advantage into permanent leverage. And 1 law turning veterans into engineers and homeowners. Put those pieces together, and that's actually how America became so great. So the real question now is, with other countries catching up fast, can that formula still hold? That's exactly what we're covering next. Subscribe so you don't miss it.